Welcome everybody to this new seminar of the seminar series NEGRAMS. And today it's a pleasure for me to introduce you Professor Micheal Hinze from University of Koblenz. And today we talk about the reduced basis method with error equivalence for constrained optimal control with the PDEs. So please, Professor Hinze, the stage is yours.
Yeah, Maria, thank you very much for this kind introduction and also the kind invitation to your seminar. What I'm going to present today is about the reduced basis method for constrained optimal control with PDEs. And I have to acknowledge support of a priority program running in Germany. It's about non-smooth PDE constraint optimization, where part of this work was supported. Yeah. So this is joint work with a former postdoc of mine. It's Ahmad Ali. I do not know whether he still is in academia, but he wanted to move to Jordania, where he stems from, and then continue his academic career there, I expect. So, reduced basis method schematic, I think when I look at the audience, you are familiar with this. What I like very much is this picture, which I took from Bernard's lecture notes, which he presented at the Rimini meeting quite 10 years ago, which I also use for my lectures. And it's about a parameter-dependent solution space depicted here in the blue line. And what we want to find now is an affine or a linear approximation space, which well approximates this nonlinear manifold M. And then the question is how one can construct this. In this talk, the solution space M will be composed of solutions of optimal control problems, which depend on a parameter mu. And we will see how we can construct those green guys here in an effective manner. That is what I'm going to present here. Yeah, so in the heart of everything is a 3D procedure where one has available an error estimator controlling the error of the solution, of the true solution, depending on the parameter, and its reduced basis solution, which I now here denote by U sub n. This is U sub n, of course, might be a finite element solution, but in our context, the Galerkin approximation is a true solution at a given parameter. And the question now is, can we now sample parameters on the basis of an here reliable, on an effective estimator, which controls this error? And the idea then is that this estimator has to be cheaply variable on now finite dimensional subspaces. Okay, so this estimation is cheap, whereas this estimation is expensive, since one would need here a true solution for a given parameter. Then it's clear if one has a training set and the parameter set of parameters, one starts with a parameter and the training set picks up the true solution to the parameter, then one gets a one-dimensional space, and then one wants to find a mu such that this estimator on this training set is maximal. Then one picks this mu and enriches now the reduced basis space with full solution related to the parameter. It realizes here this argmax. And this can be done quickly, since hopefully this estimator is available cheaply. Okay, and in this talk, of course, we will have X and Xn spaces, which are solution spaces of optimal control problems, and their reduced basis pointers, respectively. That's really, I come back to this procedure, but then I can be more concrete on the spaces which are involved. Yeah, so the minimization problem is taken from the literature. So I have also to tell that this research is now quite 3 years old, but there were not too many chances to present the results Therefore, I have only 1 or 2 talks about this, and I think it's a good opportunity to present it to some experts in the field. So the classical minimization problem of PDE constraint optimization, we have a tracking type objective here. Y is a state, Z is a desired state, which we know. We want to control the state, which is governed here by now an abstract form of an elliptic PDE. Then the right-hand side, the control enters, which you want to find or to construct in such a way that the system behaves as we desire. And desire means that the system comes as close as possible in this measure here to the desired state Z. This parameter alpha is greater than 0 in general and accounts for the cost of the control U, which enters here as a regularization term in the sense of Tychonow. Okay. The mu's now range in a compact parameter space in RP. U in a set of admissible controls is the control, Z is the desired state, and alpha is 0 of the control. And later, as one numerical example, you can have the thermal block, which is a classical example in the literature, where the form A, depending on U, is given by this guy here, and the right-hand side, B is a classical distributed control, that is that F equals. It's a setting, and now then it's well known how the optimality conditions look like for the system. They are composed of the state equation. That's PDE, where the control is on the right-hand side here. It's accompanied by an adjoint equation where the observation enters. So the adjoint equation is driven by the observation or by the mismatch in the observation. And then there is a sometimes called gradient equality or inequality, which accounts for the fact that the control is optimal. And then the optimal control is coupled to the adjoint state. That's a classical situation one has. And this inequality stems from the fact that we seek controls in a set of admissible controls, which in practice then will be something like a set of box constraints L2 functions, whereas lower and upper bounds from the control. So this then, in essence, drives this optimality system, a nonlinear system, due to this inequality here, since if I rewrite it here in our example setting, one sees that this inequality can be rewritten as an equality involving the orthogonal projection in U onto the set of admissible controls of -1 over alpha P. The P is the adjoint state. And this here is, of course, a non-differentiable operator in general, for example, in the case of box constraints, but it's an equality constraint which can be dealt with numerically in the sense of classical variants of the Newton method, of semi-smooth Newton method. But one may also rewrite an inequality like this with a complementarity function, so as an equality, as I have depicted it here. And this frequently is used also in the numerical literature related to problems like this. So, of course, the optimality conditions now form the basis for the further investigation, since the structure of the problem is encoded here. And since we have a linear quadratic problem, is a convex and closed admissible set of controls. This system here is also sufficient for to be a solution of the optimal control problem. Good. So now we come to the requirements. We want to do, of course, with the basis methods. A parameter is involved, and in this context, we then require some aspects of the forms involved. Also, you want to have that form A, the bilinear form, is uniformly continuous with respect to mu. Okay. You want to have that it is uniformly coercive with respect to mu. Call this uniform parameter from 1 and beta naught. Here, mu ranges in the parameter set P. And we want to have that B is the right-hand side is uniformly continuous in U as well. Some kappa naught. And F is a given function. Those requirements are generally asked for if one goes for reduced basis methods in the forms, the bilinear form. Coercive is probably required here, and which is, of course, a very important ingredient in the error estimation. Yeah, then one checks what are common approaches which are around to solve this problem. And then one goes to the literature, and a work which motivates us was provided by Bader, Kercher, Krepel, and Karen Leroy on certified reduced basis methods for parameterized distributed control problems, also in the presence of control constraints. And the approach then, in essence, writes down a finite dimensional counterpart of the optimal control problem, where all the ingredients in the problem are discretized. So the state is discretized or substituted by a finite dimensional pendant Yn. The control is then discretized, and then of course one gets a discretized PDE, a discrete PDE, where this Yn is a discrete state and this Un is a discrete control. And one minimizes this now with respect to U and Yn in a set where Yn is in a discrete state space and the Un in a discretized admissible control set. This is what one does, and then one can do everything what is known about optimal control and writes down optimality conditions and all the things, and can provide error estimates, and also one can provide a posteriori error bounds as a form U of mu minus Un of mu is smaller equal than an estimator delta of mu. This is estimator delta of mu is composed of 3 ingredients, namely a residual related to the state equation, a residual related to the adjoint equation, and a residual related to the gradient equation of the problem. Okay. Here are the residuals in more detail. This is what one can do, and this is what the authors here did. Okay. Now, provided 3 options for the construction of this a posteriori error bound delta mu. One of those options then is really offline, online efficient. So that is the result, and so why I'm so detailed on this slide is the fact that so my concept of discretization always is what we call in Germany minimal invasive. So I only want to touch the problem I want to solve where I need to touch it in order to compute something, or in order to be able to compute something. And the question I then pose always is, well, is it really necessary? Is it really necessary to discretize the control in this context? Okay. That is a question I always like to pose, and the reason for this maybe can be found at this slide. So I can go back to this. And when you look now at the optimality conditions, PDE, adjoint PDE, and then you get this inequality here, which you can rewrite as a non-smooth equation. Okay, but this non-smooth equation couples U to the adjoint state P. Okay, so if I now think of the situation that I have a discrete approximation available of P, then this equation automatically gives me a discrete U. Since if P is discrete and I'm be able to evaluate this the continuous projection operator, on this discrete function, I get a discrete u. But I get it for free without discretizing u explicitly. Okay, that's the idea. So this is an algebraic relation which tells me that if P is discrete, U automatically is discrete as well. That is the basic idea. So let me now go back to the part. On the other hand, this means if U is not discretized in the problem, there is no residual in U present. Okay. So I get only residuals for quantities in my problem which are discretized. And if U is not discretized, no residual pops up. That is what I highlight here. Okay. So the residual in this estimation process here enters, so the control residual enters in this estimation process that discretizes the control. That is what I highlight here. Yeah? If I would not discretize the control, I would not have this contribution. So then the question is it possible to design an approach which avoids the explicit discretization of the control, also in the reduced basis context? Yeah, this is now our contribution in this context. So the problem we looked at looks very similar to what we have seen before, but here at this part, no discrete control enters. And in the minimization, I keep the control where it was, namely in U admissible. And the idea is, of course, related to the fact that if I consider U, the control, as data for the PDE, in order to solve the PDE, it is not necessary to discretize the data of the problem, but it is necessary to be able to evaluate the functionals which are used by the data of the problem. Okay? If I will be able to evaluate this guy for an arbitrary U in U admissible for discrete functions Vn here, there is no need to discretize the control in this problem. Okay. So what we then can show is that if we proceed like this, we can prove a two-sided a posteriori error bound. So we are reliable in our error, so in the U error, in the state error, in the adjoint state error. But we are also effective. We have an effective lower bound. Okay. And the very nice thing is, I will give you details in a minute, that in the construction of this lower and this upper bound, so the estimators, only residuals for the state and the co-state or adjoint state enter. And there's no residual involved here, which is related to U. And this idea in a completely different context, namely in the context of a posteriori error control for optimal control problems, was proposed already quite some years ago by some co-workers of mine in this paper. So that is now our contribution. So in order to prove this contribution or this error, this reliable and effective error estimate, which then is a fully certified method which comes out of this, is an observation which we made in a posteriori or in the convergence of finite element methods. Okay. And there are papers around of Kohlt, Rösch, and Siebert, and of Gong and Yan, which are related to adaptive finite element convergence theory for optimal control problems. And in those papers, it is shown that the finite element error in the control problem, so in the error of control minus discrete control, so finite element approximation, state minus finite element state, adjoint state minus finite element adjoint states, this error is equivalent to an error YH Okay. That is y to the h is a continuous function related to the discrete control, or to the semi-discrete control. And this pH is an adjoint state related to the state YH of the semi-discrete. You have this error equivalence, and then the idea now was to prove something like this in the reduced basis context. Now, this is what was our driver. Yeah? So, which means that y to the h is a Ritz projection of the discrete solution YH. Y sub h is a Ritz projection of this guy, and pH is a Ritz projection of this guy in the sense of elliptic finite element dynamics. Okay, the idea now is to prove this estimate in the context of the reduced basis context, in the context of the reduced basis method, and to take the constants in the error equivalence. That's, of course, the technical demanding part here. So to show something like this with an approach which is called variation discretization, which we also here use, it's not too complicated, but the tracking of the constants is, of course, technical, since you need the constants for the error estimation. Yeah? Okay, but this is what we then did. And here you have now the ingredients. The very technical slide. I apologize for this, but I want to show you what now in this estimators, capital delta and lowercase delta pops up. So in this upper bound, the residual with respect to the state equation and the dual norm pops up, as you expect this, as well as the residual in the adjoint equation. And the same for the lower bound. Okay, and those constants, C1, C2, C3, and C4, are now determined in terms of the coefficients or of the constants which we defined at the very beginning. If you assume that we have coercivity beta of the bilinear form, continuity of the bilinear form with some gamma, then continuity of the right-hand side with kappa and things like that. Here you see now the constant. Here you see the estimators, and now you can use those estimators, of course, to construct reduced basis. Yeah. And as you see here, there's no control residual involved in this business. So technical, but that only serves the purpose to show you, to convince you that you can have something like this, and everything can be computed. Yeah. Then we have also proven a different error bound, which relative error bound, which is then used to compare our results to the results from the literature. Yeah. So this bound is also used. Yeah, then the redescending comes back, okay, and the sampling procedure now works as on the second slide, of course, but this estimator here now is the estimator from the slide before. And what we now construct are spaces which are spanned from states and adjoint states. This is what we do, but this is all. If you go to the literature, the fully discrete approach is taken. Here also control snapshots pop up, and also snapshots of a complementarity function. If you want to go for complementarity function. Yeah, and then you can also prove convergence of the method in the context which you find then also in the lecture notes of Bernard Stonk already. The suppositions here need that we have Lipschitz continuity of the discrete solution, what we can establish, and certain Lipschitz continuity of the forms A, E, and F. If one has this, then one can prove where Hn is now the step size in the parameter discretization process. So Pn is a set of parameters I use for the construction of the reduced basis space. And then I define the grid size or the difference or the distance from a parameter set here. And if I have this available, then I can prove that the reduced basis solution converges to the truth solution with h to the t, where t is the minimum of those three exponents. So the proof then is along the lines of what you really find in the lecture notes of Bernard Stonk. It's not a mystery, but in the context of optimal control. So that's already time to come to numerical examples and to check whether the method works. Okay, and here again, we use problems from the literature. And the first one is the thermal block problem, which is example 6.1 in the paper of Arthur Grid and Deroy. Here you have the PDE. The parameter dependency is on mu. Mu ranges in this parameter space here. Is it exactly the same as it here? You take some alpha. The state space is now H10. And the inner product here, use in Y, is the classical inner product used by the gradients, which is an inner product since we have zero boundary conditions. And we know the Poincaré constants for our domain and things like this. So the constants which enter the problem are more or less explicitly available. Okay. And then we do reduced basis space construction, and then we compare what our estimator yields compared to the true relative error. You see, I hope you can see this, the green dots here over the dimension give you the reduction of the estimator, and the red guy here is the reduction of the true error with increasing dimension of the reduced basis. Okay, you see that this works quite nicely. And now we compare this with the results from the literature. That is a picture taken from the paper of Bader. So I asked them that I can use it, and I agreed on that. Then you have a slack method where you replace inequalities in your control problem with the slack variable by equalities, and you have a classical error approach, error estimation approach for variation inequalities, which you apply here. Then you get this cost line here for this slack error, and the blue line cost line for the classical error you have. And then you have here three a posteriori bounds, or results of the three different a posteriori bounds. Here is what they call primal slack estimator, which is the best performing method, and it's really online efficient. Then you get a primal bound, which is a classical approach, which was taken from a posteriori error control for variation. And here a third TV, called TV bound, which uses techniques proposed by Eli Trölsch in the a posteriori analysis for optimal control problems. But this is a very computational expensive bound, since every evaluation of this bound requires a full finite element solution. So you see that the methods work for all three estimators with the best results for this primal slack bound, which you get here. So, but you see also that the estimator goes beyond 10 to the minus 3, so say 8 times, 7 times 10 to the minus 3. This is the best they achieve with dimension 30. Okay, this is what you see. And if I look to this picture here and I look to the log scale on the left-hand side here, I see that, say, what was it? 7 times 10 to the minus 3. I'm here. So I'm here with, let's say, 7. I would say then I expect our method dimension 7 and stop the procedure. So okay, much lower dimensions with our approach than you see in this fully discrete approach. And this is, of course, due to the fact that we do not involve discretization of the control. You can do this also for more demanding complex rates, though also consider the paper of Bader et al. And also there we see that we get an error reduction. Always a gap is there, of course, estimator and true error. But again, if you look at the scaling here, you see that if they go for the best what they can do, it's a black guy here. They can go to 5 times 10 to the minus 1. And we get here to 5 times 10 to the minus 1, 10 to the minus 1. We are here somewhere, and then we also get need dimension 10. There's a need for post dimension 30. That we go to the error plots, the results or the differences in more drastic. So what we learn by this is that it really makes sense in this context not to include discretization of quantities which need not be discretized in order to compute a solution. Yeah, so conclusions from this. So here we present, say, let's call it still novel basis approach for optimal control problems with constraints. It's now a nonlinear problem, of course, not the linear quadratic, but the constraints induce nonlinearities in the optimality system. We exploit the optimality system structure. This is what I explained to you. So that is my, of course, that is what I always say, never discretize controls if it is not necessary. So then we see that with our methods, at the example class at least, obtain lower dimensional reduced basis spaces, which gives the same approximation properties. Is this better or optimal? Optimal we do not know. We are also able to prove a full error equivalence. So we have reliability, upper bound, and effectiveness, a lower bound for our estimation process. And this is what I call full certification as a method. But of course, it is not fully online offline efficient, since the fact that you do not discretize the control induces that you have to check on the finite element grid for the border of the active set. That this then gives a linear dependence on the full finite element dimension of the problem. This is a price you have to pay for. Currently, we work on improvements of the error bounds. We extend this to parabolic optimal control problems. It's currently done with Carmen Kessler. Also to go for a bit of the convergence in terms of the control of the underlying problem. That was it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hinze, for this talk, very interesting talk. So now it's question time. So I actually ask the people to unmute yourself and ask directly to the speaker the question if you want. So let me see if there are some. Oh, Professor Irescu, Trajan.
Absolutely. I
Please.
always have questions. Yeah. So, Michael, thank you so much for very nice, very clear talk. Now, my question is I have a few questions, but I'll ask a silly one first. So, when you're talking about why superscript H and P superscript H.
Yeah,
So, right, I don't remember the slide number, but
yeah, it is here, yeah?
Yeah, perfect. Yes, this is it. So do I understand correctly? So they are solutions of continuous problems. So do you have to, okay, all right. But do you need to get some bounds on them? I mean, how do they come up in the analysis, or how does it go? What do you
Yeah, so what you see here is, so this y to the h is now a continuous function, and the state I compute is its Ritz projection, okay? And what I know about the error of a function and its Ritz projection, so I have error estimates for this. So this I can control in H, and this I can control in H, okay? By the Ritz projection error. Therefore, I can control this in H. That's the idea behind this, yeah.
Okay, and then, but do you need the constants in the, so you can control it? But
yeah. That, of course, you need a constant here. You can control this error in both directions. Okay? In this, when you go to these papers, yeah. Okay, and the constants are popping up. And this, what I say is that what we did is we looked up how they proceed, and whenever they talked about Galerkin approximations in the finite element sense, we replace the argumentation by Galerkin approximations in the reduced basis context. Yeah? That's a Galerkin method on a different space. That's all. So all the concepts they developed in the finite element world could be carried over to the reduced basis world, and then we mimicked what they did. But the complicated part then was the tracking of the constants in the error equivalence. And this is, if you go to the paper I also mentioned in the abstract, there of course all the details are given, and then you will see that it's not super nice and it's not something for a talk. Yeah? But we were simply inspired what they did in those works, and then we mimicked this on in the reduced basis world, since both are Galerkin methods, and that was the idea. Yeah?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions? Maybe I can ask one. So if I understood correctly, basically this analysis is based on control all over the domain, like distributed control. But it looks to me that basically, you know, the extension to boundary control seems okay, or
it's yeah. Let me say in the following, it's straightforward in the sense. Here's a control problem. Yeah? So here I'll use a control space, and if I now want to go for a boundary control here, so for Neumann boundary control, then of course you can model this by a right-hand side, which then includes a boundary integral over the control. Yeah? So the structure is the same.
Okay, so it's the same
then
structure.
extends this also to this.
Okay, but
there's also.
Sorry. No, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Now my question was like, do you think that basically, you know, the sharpness of the bound will be somehow okay.
Yeah, that's of course a different issue when it's then to check what can be said about the boundary control then in the setting. But in this finite element error estimation, U is data. Okay, it's something like a right-hand side. And this is what the guys from the finite element world also then consider.
Okay.
I will not say that it works. So what I've shown you, the finite element analysis, is done for the distributed control case. But I think that you also can carry over this to the boundary control in the case of Neumann boundary control. It is different for directly boundary control. It's much more complicated.
Okay. Great. And are there other questions for Professor Hinze? Ryan, please.
Okay, I have one more, and I'm always asking this type of question. So, what you showed, Michael, at the beginning with the requirements. So you mentioned that you need the usual of coursivity and continuity and
Yeah.
right. So I'm just wondering, so if you, I mean, and I'm interested in convection dominated type of problems, and I'm just, so I'm just wondering how this type of setting, so let's say, I mean, even at the linear case, think convection diffusion, but convection dominated where the diffusion is very small, maybe the coursivity constant is gonna, so how does this, do you have a feel for how this impacts the, you know, the whole a posteriori error analysis framework? Any idea?
Of course, yeah. It's a point. So when the form then no longer is symmetric, yeah, things like this, then things become more involved. Let me say it so. So what we did is for elliptic PDEs, since for this case you have available also the convergence of the finite element method applied to the optimal control problem. Yeah? So that is what we did. I agree. So it is not yet done for situations you have now in mind, and I expect it to be much more technically and complicated. I also think that maybe this then is not the right concept if you have a convection diffusion problems. Yeah? So if there's transport included, maybe you better switch to this square approach. Then renders the problem into something which is symmetric. Yeah? You get a different bilinear form then, but then you have to deal with this more complicated bilinear form, but then you get a symmetric bilinear form, which you then may treat along the lines of what you did before. But it is not done. Also not the finite element case. But it could be a path you may wish to go along. So to make the problem symmetric, but of course you pay for this if you go for these squares formulations. You know that you square things, in particular condition numbers, coursivity constants, things like this. And if they were small already, they become even smaller. So you also pay for this, but the symmetry may help you then in the analysis later on. But to the best of my knowledge, this was not yet done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Are there other questions from the audience? It looks that it is not the case, so I think that we can thank again Professor Hinze for this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for attending and for giving me the opportunity to bring to you those things. And of course, I will try to join and step in more frequently to your seminars. Yeah. Okay.
So
thank you. Have a nice
Thank you,
day.
Micheal.
Thank you.
See you.